Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to the critical intersection of racial injustice and climate change. My name is Josna Harris, and I am joining you from my home in Minnesota, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. Welcome. Before we get started, we just wanted to take some time to acknowledge the effects of genocide and colonization on Indigenous people, and to consider how these injustices have shaped our climate crisis. People of color and Indigenous people have and will continue to disproportionately bear the burden of climate change under our current systems of power and privilege. But we also recognize the tremendous resilience and innovative climate solutions that are found in these same communities. We'd like you now to just please share in the chat who you are, where you're joining from, and if you know the native land, please share that too. If you don't know, we invite you to look up the land that you are on, and we've pasted a link in the chat where you can do that. This workshop is the first event to kick off a virtual series that is in celebration of a book called Eyewitness that I have here with me today. And this book is written by people all across the state of Minnesota. Eyewitness shares the firsthand accounts of climate change from people all across the state through poems, stories, and art. And although the stories are from Minnesota, the themes are universal: gratitude, loss, responsibility, resilience, and hope. And essentially, Eyewitness is really a demonstration of literary activism. It is a testimony of climate change. And we are excited to share that Climate Generation will be hand delivering copies of the Eyewitness book to every Minnesota policymaker in 2021, along with constituent letters from you. So we want you to stay tuned, because later in this workshop, we will be sharing how you can engage with your policymaker on climate change, no matter where you live. And before we go any further, we just want to say a thank you to all of you who are joining us today. And we also want to give a shout out to all of the authors in the Eyewitness book, and also to the many partners that made the Eyewitness project possible. So thank you. And today we are also honored to have with us three incredible speakers. We have Ricardo Levins Morales, Ben Passer, and Maria Isa. And I am truly excited to be listening and learning from each one of them. And there will be something that will be required of you too. So you will be invited to participate in live action opportunities throughout this workshop. So as you listen and learn, we also want you to lean into the role that your voice can play in demanding climate justice. We also have two workshops that will be following this one, and they're coming up this month and also next. And you will not want to miss them, because they actually will be building on what we share together today. Each workshop is going to be on a unique topic and will be shared through a combination of storytelling, music, and climate solutions. So you can learn more and sign up for the series by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen, which says Explore Eyewitness or Follow Eyewitness. And then to tell you a little bit more about who we are as an organization, we are Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy, and we are a nonprofit with a mission to empower individuals and their communities to engage in solutions to climate change. Our office is actually located just a few blocks away from the place where George Floyd was tragically murdered by the hands of the Minneapolis police, sparking racial uprising and protests around the world, and energizing the ongoing movement for racial justice. We know that there are significant challenges and opportunities that are before all of us. But we know that a better world is possible. And we also know that our current reality is demanding it now. Climate change and racial injustice are deeply interconnected. They were built on and are being perpetuated by the same economic and political structures, systems, and policies. And we know that we cannot effectively address one without addressing the other. The overlapping crises in our world, including the climate crisis, racial injustice, and the COVID-19 pandemic, have all really exposed the injustices in our world and also the interconnected relationships between them. According to a recent Harvard study, areas with communities of color are more likely to experience high levels of air pollution than white communities, contributing to the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in Black and Latino communities. Yet, according to opinion polls conducted by the Yale's Program on Climate Change Communication, Black and Latino voters are also among the most concerned about the climate crisis, and they are also among the most willing to take action. We know that the next few years hold significant challenges, and that the outcome of the next election will really set the course for how these overlapping injustices and issues are addressed in our country and at the federal level. It is truly a challenging time to maintain optimism. But we are also encouraged by the power of our voices to come together and demand justice. And we have seen that scaling from individual to collective action can happen rapidly and result in a significant impact. And as an organization, we are committed to deepening our own efforts to work in coalition with others who are already doing this critical work, and by elevating the voices, the stories, and the leadership of those who have often been left out of mainstream conversations on climate change. We know that sharing our stories can be even more important in times of crisis because they can help us process, they can prompt healing, they can unify us, and they can also encourage us to find the resolve to endure. And we are humbled today by the fact that so many of you are here with us, joining us right now. And I am hopeful that your presence here is a demonstration that you care too and that you are ready to take action. So thank you for being part of this conversation. And as you listen to each of our guests today, we ask that you just show them some love in the chat. So please post a word of encouragement, or you can use the emoji icon in the chat. And you can do this whenever you're listening to a speaker and you want to show agreement or support or reciprocity. And with that, I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you our first guest, who is Ricardo Levins Morales. And as I welcome Ricardo, I would love if you could just post some love for him in the chat. So Ricardo describes himself as a healer and trickster organizer disguised as an artist. He grew up in the anti-colonial movement in his native Puerto Rico and was drawn into activism in Chicago, where his family moved in the late 1960s. He has been long involved in struggles for labor rights and social justice and is currently active in the movement for police abolition. He sees his art and organizing as practices to address individual and collective and historical trauma. He co-founded the workshop series Restoring Power, Trauma, and Resilience for Organizers. And he operates with a crew of coworkers out of his studio and storefront in South Minneapolis. Ricardo is a legend in the social justice movement. He is also an author in the Eyewitness book. And so we are excited to welcome Ricardo today. Thank you, Ricardo, for being here with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. And thank you to all of y'all who are here. I'm very pleased and excited to be with so many people. So, yeah, and a shout out to Maria Isa, fellow Boricua. Always nice to have compatriotas, Andy. So I'm going to dive right in on the theme that we're talking about, right, which is social justice, racial justice, and climate change, climate justice, how these all link together. It's not going to be a revelation to anyone on this call that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people bear the heaviest impacts from the warming of the Earth's atmosphere and oceans. I come from Puerto Rico, which is still devastated from Hurricane Maria, the first of the superstorms, at least in the Caribbean, of the climate change era. And this summer, talking frequently with my sister Aurora, who's back on the land we grew up on, the air has periodically been choked with dust blown across the Atlantic from northern Africa, where drought threatens the agriculture and water access on which people depend. Black communities in the US suffer under hotter temperatures, sometimes as much as 13 degrees hotter than white ones, because the market-driven planning process doesn't prioritize planting trees where there are dark people. From Chad to Mexico to the Philippines to Bangladesh to Mozambique to Siberia, floods and droughts, forest fires, melting glaciers, deforestation, and desertification are setting in motion real great currents of migrating humans, right? Looking for safe haven, finding their way blocked by xenophobic regimes that also pander to the desires of fossil fuel companies, palm oil planters, and mining corporations. And all these same factors are also causing whales, crabs, fish, insects, and in fact, somewhere around half the species of the Earth to be in the process of shifting to cooler areas, often changing their feeding habits and increasing the transfer of infectious diseases from one species to another, as we're experiencing now that includes us. And of course, who, due to structural racism built into everything, from housing to recreation to education to healthcare delivery and police intervention, who will be the first and the most deeply harmed by all of these, right? We know that. But what ties climate change and racial justice together is more than its unequal impacts, crucial as those are to understand. It's also their common origins. The capitalist system began to crystallize in Europe around 20 generations ago. That is to say, in the mid-1400s. The Roman Empire, which had disintegrated 900 years before that, had been a massive slave society. And slavery was never totally eradicated, never disappeared. Throughout the feudal period, there were always sectors of the economy that depended on slaves. But slaves have this tendency to want to run away. Enslaved people, working people, are basically treated as a rechargeable energy source. And not everybody wants to be treated that way. And many of the slaves in Europe were actually kidnapped from the Slavic region. That's where the word slave comes from. And as such, they could disappear into the population if they escaped. And it was really the Portuguese who were the first ones who found a solution. In their expansion down the coasts of Africa looking for trading routes, they began a lucrative new business kidnapping dark-skinned Africans and importing them to Europe, where they looked different enough from the general population that they were stamped with their class status, and it was not possible to simply disappear into the community. In fact, it was the Portuguese who started calling people from sub-Saharan Africa Black instead of referring to them according to the origin of the area that they came from. And so that's really what we see as capitalism and anti-Black racism broke out of the same seed. And they later gave birth to the more general ideology of white supremacy, which was needed when European colonial power spreading to the rest of the world needed a governing principle for their colonial empires. And so anti-Black racism was generalized into white supremacy, right? So greed, short-sightedness, carelessness, recklessness, all these things have been part of humanity forever. along with countering influences. But what happened at that time in Europe, this thing called capitalism, turned those things into a religion. And the dynamism of capitalism as a system and its destructiveness stem from its major accomplishment, which is to sever cleverness from wisdom. Let me say that again. They managed to separate cleverness from wisdom. Cleverness is what allows us to make things and do things and examine things. Wisdom is the knowledge that everything is connected. And so we need to proceed with that knowledge. So that, for example, cleverness is inventing a lever so that we can dislodge a boulder, right? Major technological advance. And wisdom says, but you better look down the mountain to see what it's going to go crashing into when you set it loose and roll it down the mountain. Capitalism comes along and says, nah, just roll it. Just roll it. You know, if it wrecks something, somebody's going to come up with a new clever innovation to fix it. So we don't have to think ahead because we are an endless font of creativity, we capitalists, and it'll be okay. So it really, that ideology trashes the idea that things are connected or that those connections matter, right? And part of the process of conquest has been suppressing that knowledge so that the so-called Indian boarding schools, they were really the white folks' education system, but the boarding schools that Native people here were forced into was meant to break the flow of knowledge between generations because that idea that everything is deeply connected is incompatible with the new system of economics that they were imposing on the indigenous lands that had been stolen. So anyway, this process has set off, 500 years of a lot of damage. It's an all-out assault on nature. Everywhere the system expands, two ecosystems collapse. Soil, land, populations, extinctions, anything that's is not considered productive if it's not generating profits and so forth. And racism, and the uneven distribution of both impacts and benefits is the primary way that change is prevented. The impacts fall on dark people, and then white people feel threatened by efforts to change what's going on, and they defend the system against that, right? My sister Aurora calls the greed of the 1% a spiritual eating disorder, right? There is no, what do they call it in psychology? No inhibitory impulse, only an excitatory impulse, but nothing to tell you to stop. So here's just some lines I wrote in a piece 10 years ago. To sort of shift, what is it that we're up against? Corporate decision makers are not driven by a desire to cause harm. It's just that the world outside of markets is not visible to them. Any underdeveloped regions of the world are seen to be wasted until they have been replaced with farmland, resorts, or strip mines. They don't think about or are aware of the forests of the Niger Delta, or the dreams of miners, or the nesting grounds of pelicans. What is real to them, on the other hand, is flows of capital, the sudden hotspots of investment, the jostling of exchange rates and interest rates pinging up, the shimmering of investment instruments made out of thin air and audacity, and ultimately those sweet, sweet cascades of profit. These define the real world to them. It's a dynamic world, a beautiful world. They will defend that world as fiercely as we defend ours. And what's important to know about that is, in terms of its implications for how we struggle, is that any advances towards stability and sustainability to the system that we're dealing with, they are just tactical retreats until the balance of power or a new strategy allows them to return to the endless devouring and consumption of the world's resources without constraint. So that we're seduced into thinking that these measures that were offered mean that just with enough pushing, enough negotiating with that pathological greed, we'll come up with a way, sort of a middle ground that will allow us to move towards sustainability. And actually, that's just a way to sedate us. So that you see things like the Paris Climate Accords, negotiated essentially by the corporate representatives of all nations, which is intended to keep us out of the way. They're accords that would have been pathetically inadequate if everybody had implemented them, but they were put in place with the knowledge that almost nobody would. But then we end up fighting like crazy to get the Paris Accords back. And we feel that we're really struggling, and the corporations are fighting against it, but it doesn't matter if they win or lose, because in fact, the path of development that they are demanding will be secured in either case. Right now, the fossil fuel companies are doing that. They know that the writing's on the wall around oil production, just like the tobacco companies knew it decades ago. But that didn't prevent them from trying to squeeze in a few more $1 trillion of profit through stonewalling. With the fossil fuel companies, they're shifting to a future based in plastics, a massive creation of plastics for everything. And even while the oceans are choked, so what are they doing? They're investing heavily in the message of recycling and these new technologies, which aren't so new, but you say that recycling is the wave of the future, and recycling this and recycling that, and we fossil fuels are so dedicated to recycling, even though they know that recycling will never deal with more than the tiniest percentage of the waste that they're intent on producing. But if it keeps us quiet, keeps us sedated, then that's no problem because the profits keep pouring in. So the struggle that we're in is essentially to restore wisdom's dominant position in relationship with cleverness. That's what it's all about. And the solutions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, the solutions include allowing ocean ecosystems to recover from corporate predation, restoring land, and to sustainability, nurturing soil complexity, and so forth. And restoring resources, resourcing poor people so they don't have to go out and deplete the fisheries, the forests, and the wetlands to obtain fuel, food, and things that they can sell for cash. Everybody is forced to be complicit in the system of destruction when this vision, this worldview of scarcity is imposed on us. And that's really part of the genius of capitalism, is to generate unimaginable surpluses and abundance while continuing to convince us that we live in a world of absolute scarcity and must compete with each other in order to survive and rob from nature, because where else can you go when you're poor? And the people who need to be carrying out these changes are largely the marginalized, the people set aside and exploited under the colonial and pseudo-colonial systems. Corporate landholding, for example, the misuse of soil is one of the great drivers of climate warming. The soil could be just turning the soil back into what it's supposed to be, what it's meant to be, will be the greatest stabilizer of climate and the greatest reversal of climate change. So the corporate land holdings will need to be converted to ecological agriculture. And the farms that are small farms enslaved to the corporate marketing system to be able to return to sane kinds of soil management. And that has to be managed on a small scale by large numbers of people moving onto the land in direct relationship with the land and with the soil. So land reclamation, urban gardening, mutual aid distribution, healing support, opposing pipelines, housing reform, ending reckless mining and water contamination, restoration of reefs and wetlands and mangroves, resourcing poor people, as I already mentioned, which also incidentally reduces population growth, since having as many children as possible is a product of insecurity. And we see police, prisons, mass incarcerations are primarily tools to manage white supremacy and protect wealth inequality. So dismantling these things, restoring, or not restoring, but implementing universal access to stable housing and so forth, are counters to that system of racism that underlies all of the systems of exploitation and destruction under which we live, including the destruction of climate. And it's important to note that if we were to stop warming the climate today, that would not end the destruction of our planet, the collapse of ecosystems, and the exploitation of humans, of course, because those are not, climate change is not the problem. Climate change is one of the symptoms. And we've reached a moment in the history of our world, in the history of all life on Earth, where we need to be looking at real solutions. So, you know, oh God, I should have looked him up. There was a scientist who described our way of thinking to say it has become easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism, which is kind of bizarre considering sort of how clearly dysfunctional that system is. You know, the idea that if everybody just behaves in the most narrowly greedy way all the time and doesn't think ahead, it's all going to work out okay. And this invisible hand will solve it all. So the idea that you can reverse global warming while leaving white supremacy in place is essentially an attempt to derail our chances to succeed. That the healing of the world and the healing of our wounds and the healing of our relationships with each other are one healing process. There is no separation, but that means that just connecting those narratives, connecting them into one story, one body that needs to be healed, right? You know, our bodies are not a collection of isolated parts and organs with no relationship that can be cured separately. No, we need to heal the whole body. We need to heal our immune systems. We need to lower our immune inflammation, our systemic inflammation. Just like on a global level, we need to lower the systemic inflammation of hopelessness that keeps us paralyzed and keeps us thinking in the really imaginative, creative terms that we know that we are capable of. So that means connecting these stories again is not only the strategic basis for change, but it's also a way of modeling the wise future that we need to bring to life, which is a future based on understanding the deep interconnectivity of everything. So that's what I've got.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I just feel full listening to you, and it's always a joy to hear you. Just so much truth and clarity and vision. I especially love hearing about how my healing is really wrapped up with your healing. All of us here are one body, and our stories are also not disconnected, but it's one story. So I'm excited to move forward on that foundation that you've built for us, that climate change is not the problem, it is a symptom. And just want to say, there's a lot of love happening in the chat right now. So thank you so much, Ricardo. I saw somebody say that they could not keep up with taking notes because there was just so much wisdom that you were sharing.
Well, thank you all.
For
It's lovely to be in this together with you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Amazing. So next, we're going to turn it over to you all and invite you to take an action with us right now. So what we're going to ask you to do is going to be up on the screen here. So we'd like you to just take a moment to think about all of the wisdom that Ricardo shared with us and think about your own connections to climate justice. So we have a prompt on the screen. What motivates you to care about climate justice? So we're going to take a moment now, about a minute, for you to reflect on that. So feel free to think about it, grab a piece of paper or a notebook, and just jot down your thoughts. Okay, thank you for everybody who posted in the chat. We want you to continue sharing your reflections, and we're going to ask you to take it to the next level. So if you have social media, we'd love for you to use Twitter and tweet out why you support climate justice. So we've got a template for you that's on the screen, language that you can use, and it's also posted in the chat. So if you could take about 30 seconds right now to go ahead and tweet that out, we'll take some time here. All right, so now I'm thrilled to invite our next guest, who is Ben Passer from Fresh Energy. And so as I introduce Ben, I'd love if you could again post just some love in the chat for Ben, welcoming him, and using the emojis to say just cheering Ben on. Ben is the Director of Energy and Access at Fresh Energy. And Ben's work directs Fresh Energy's work to advance equitable outcomes across Minnesota's energy system, and also supports the organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Welcome, Ben. Ben holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of Minnesota and a Juris Doctor from William Mitchell College of Law. He is also a member of the Minnesota Bar. And Ben also serves on Climate Generation's board of directors and also chairs our board equity committee. And Ben also served graciously on the selection committee for the Eyewitness book and really helped to curate that collection. Ben is joining us to share a personal story that he so thoughtfully crafted just for us today. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Josna. And thank you, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with you all today, and I'm so humbled to share this space with Ricardo and Maria. As Josna mentioned, my name is Ben Passer, and this is my climate story. I could sum up my relationship with both race and climate in one word: complicated. I'm a mixed race male, half black and half white, and for basically my entire life, I've struggled with my racial identity. I have deep emotional ties to Black culture and my heritage, but I have no actual connection to my Black family. Growing up in an all-white family, I'm fully aware of my white roots, but I don't feel connected to whiteness. And I know the world perceives me as a person of color, though that perception shifts wildly depending on where I am and who I'm with. My wife could probably tell you about a few uncomfortable moments during our vacation in Puerto Rico a few years ago, where folks we met after a foggy hike in El Yunque National Forest assumed from my brown skin that I was a fluent Spanish speaker. Now, this confusion was nothing new. I vividly remember, as a kindergartner, sitting in the cafeteria of my elementary school, having classmates ask me if I was adopted, because they'd only seen my white biological mother at parent-teacher conferences. Internally, I remember the tension I felt as a high school student, not being able to fully relate to my entirely white friend group, friendships I still hold dearly to this day. And in my highly competitive, mostly white law school class, I never felt totally welcome either. I knew I was interested in the principles of justice and equal rights, but something about being there just didn't click. For me, that confusion vanished when Philando Castile was shot and killed on July 6, 2016. a mile and a half from my childhood home. The intersection where he died was so familiar to me. I thought of the hot August days when my family and I crossed Larpenteur Avenue as we walked to the Minnesota State Fair, one of my favorite traditions. I thought of all those nights I rode my bike home from the comic book store that used to be located right next to that intersection. For the first time in my life, I felt this collision of race and place, the place where I had roots. That tragedy was a moment of reckoning for me. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear. I knew things needed to get better, and I knew I needed to play a role. I guess you could say my interest in energy and the environment took a similar path. I remember learning in high school about the environment, pollution and its effect on the ozone layer, and this thing called global warming. When I was 18 years old, during my freshman year of college, I remember stumbling upon this new vehicle from Honda on the internet. It was called the FCX Clarity, and it was the first hydrogen fuel cell vehicle sold to retail customers. I became obsessed with this thing. A totally clean vehicle that drives just like a normal car. I mean, what's not to love, right? From that point on, I started to pay more attention to things like wind and solar energy and new technologies. But all through college and law school, I never really thought of any of that as a profession, just a personal interest. It took me a while to realize that all of these things, climate, race, and justice, were related. It sounds funny, maybe embarrassingly obvious to say now, but I really didn't figure it out until a couple of years ago. So much of my journey, especially over the last couple of years, has been figuring out who I am, how that shows up in the world, and how both of those things show up in my work. I think it's fair to say the energy and environmental movement has been on a similar journey to put all of these pieces together too. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, yet another tragic killing of a black man in the place I call home, many environmental and climate organizations, mine included, put out statements of solidarity and committed to deeper learning and action. I think that in a lot of ways, the murder of George Floyd was that moment of reckoning for our movement, like the killing of Philando Castile was a movement of reckoning for me personally. These tragedies should never have happened, but I hope we can fully embrace this wake-up call, and that we can all do the necessary and long overdue work. The hard truth is that the mainstream energy and environmental movement has long struggled with racial diversity, and has often overlooked or completely excluded under-resourced communities and communities of color. This is unacceptable, because we know that these communities are the very ones that will be harmed first and worst by the impacts of climate change. And in fact, they already are. This conversation won't always be easy, but we need to have a dialogue about how race shows up, truly shows up, in the energy and environmental movement, and our ability, our obligation, to change the systems and structures that have perpetuated inequities and oppression for so many decades. We need to make sure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color truly see themselves in this movement and are fully included in it. Today, with the help of my peers and my friends of color, I feel I've found my voice, my own place in the world, and in this work. My story is just one of so many, and I'm privileged to have this microphone when so many don't and haven't. But my hope is that through sharing the tensions I felt, this complicated journey, I can help others like me so that in 5 or 10 years, they have no doubt, no hesitation about their rightful place in this work, and have the opportunity to thrive. My hope is that they'll see themselves in this movement not just as one part of it, but as leaders. My hope is that we'll use this moment of reckoning as an inflection point to fully embrace the intersectionality of all of these issues. My hope for the energy and environmental movement is that we center race, equity, and justice in all of our work, like the future of our planet depends on it. Because it does.
Thank you so much, Ben. I just love how you have so beautifully woven together your own moment of reckoning and awakening with the awakening of the climate movement. And I know I'm hearing you say this is not an easy conversation to have, and I can imagine that it was not easy for you to find the words to share with us today. So I thank you so much for sharing in such a heartfelt and vulnerable way, and for inviting us into your story. And I love that you're sharing your hopes with us, and really a bold call for us to do things differently, and that we have that opportunity before us now. Thank you, Ben. So now we have another opportunity to turn it back over to you. We want to keep this going where we have cycles of listening to the wisdom that our guests are sharing with us. They're absolutely amazing. I know I am learning so much and really leaning into this opportunity. But we also want to continue to just invite you and challenge you. So right now we'd like to share with you an opportunity to sign a petition that will be emailed to legislators that let them know that we are demanding for climate justice. So you can click on the link at the bottom of your screen that says sign the petition, and find it there. It's also posted in the chat. So we know we really want to raise our voices together, and so sending this petition will really call on our elected officials to advance the deep and transformative solutions that will make it clear that racial justice and climate justice are inseparable. And if you are not from Minnesota, you are welcome to make a copy of this petition and send it to your legislators. So we'll give you just a minute to go ahead and take this action. It looks like the link isn't working right now. So if you could go ahead and save that link and sign the petition later, I think that's probably a way that we'll troubleshoot this. So go ahead and save that link and be sure to visit that later so we can make sure that we have a collection of voices to share with our legislators. And with that, I think we're going to move on to introducing our next guest, who is Maria Isa, who I am super excited to have with us today. And as I introduce Maria, love if you could again share all of the support in the chat for Maria, who will be doing a live performance with us today. So Maria is a Boricua singer, songwriter, actress, rapper, youth worker, and international recording artist who is born in Minnesota and raised on St. Paul's West Side barrio. Isa was raised by the influences of many different rhythms of Afro-Latino Indigenous culture. Hello, Maria. And channeled it into performing arts and activism at a very early age. Since 2009, Isa serves as CEO for her independent label, Sota Rico, distributing over 15 projects, bridging her music mix and upbringing of Minnesota and Puerto Rico culture into a fusion of sound. She fundraises and serves as an advisor for El Fondo Boricua Hurricane Relief Fund for Puerto Rico of St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. We are humbled by Maria's presence today and thankful for her willingness to share with us her beautiful music. Maria will be performing Como Duele, Bomba for Big Floyd, which is a tribute song that Maria wrote for George Floyd, who would carry her bomba drum across many different performances in Minneapolis. Hello, Maria, can you hear me? Maria, can you hear me?
Hi, we're having a problem hearing. Hello.
Okay, well, I will turn my mic off and we'll see if we can hear you better.
Hey, we can hear you live.
Great. I just can't hear you. But there we go. Let's try this out. Hello. Hello, hello.
We can hear you, Maria.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay. I'm having some difficulties hearing you back, but if you can keep the flow, I can hear myself. So my name is Maria Isa. Thank you for having me be a part of this conversation. So important. We can't talk about one injustice without the others. They're all under this umbrella of colonization. And I am an advocate for my people of Borinquen and all the indigenous and tribal folks throughout the world who continue to suffer due to the injustices of colonization. My voice is of my ancestors, and I do understand that they would like to have this history of context that leaves the ancestral history of the Taino people as if we are extinct. But we are still here surviving a war of genocide. And that is a tactic of the climate change, is a tactic of genocide that I have witnessed with my own eyes, that my family continues to survive, and our gente, not just in Borinquen, but here as well in the native Dakota Anishinaabe land of Minnesota. I stand in solidarity with all of our folks, and I have to give homage with these lyrics that I'm going to sing today, a montage of all of those rhythms that have birthed me through the waters, through the earth, through the fires that have cleansed. What we are experiencing here, specifically in the Twin Cities, is a parallel reflection of rhythm that is happening around the world. And my connection is with my drum. My connection is with the stones of my patrias and the love of Borinquen. This is a call to our mother, our goddess Taina Atabe, who is mother and who gives birth to the children of Huracan, who we know our connection on the islands have been surviving because with the hurricanes, the purpose are to cleanse what is chaotic. And right now we are in a chaos. Mother is tired. We are surviving a pandemic, but at the same time, the birds are singing more. The water is getting cleaner. The sky is clearer. We have to listen to mother because our children and our children's children, we want to see the next 7 generations be able to not live in a world that we are suffocating in, but a world that they deserve freely to live as our ancestors once did. And it's getting to be time, tiempo. Oh, guatabe, guataba, guatabe, oh, guatabe, guataba, atabe, 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 oh, guatabe, atabe, atabe, oh, guatabe. Cúrame con tus aguas, atabe, atabe. Cúrame, madre mía, atabe, atabe. Dakota que tonota y noti, atabe, tabe, sálvame, atabe, otogua, atabe, cúrame, atabe, con tu sangre atabe, 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 cúrame, atabe, con su amor, atabe, cúrame, atabe, y sálvame, atabe, cúrame, atabe, oh guape, atabe, oh guape, atabe, oh guape, atabe, oh guape, atabe. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra, porque yo tengo calor, a mí me da. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra, porque lo que tengo lo van a gastar. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra, porque no tengo y lo van a cortar. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra, porque lo van a cortar. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra. Estoy buscando un árbol. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra. Estoy buscando un árbol. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra. Porque el que tengo me va a cortar. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra. Porque el que tengo lo van a cortar. Estoy buscando un árbol que me dé sombra. Porque el que tengo lo van a cortar. Lo van a cortar. Lo van a cortar. Como duele. 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 Pero moré como pilando, como chamán. Como duele. 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 Mataron a Oré como filando, como chamán, como duele. Y Minneapolis, la policía, mataron otro negro. Mataron a Jorge como filando, como Brianna, como duele. En Minnesota, la policía, mataron otro negro. Yo no quiero este dolor, yo no quiero, este dolor, como duele, como duele, como duele, como duele, como duele, como duele, Minnesota, cuando matan a la gente, como duele cuando la policía mata gente, como duele, como duele, como duele, como duele, como duele. la guerra con la tierra. No se puede que no, no, no. No se puede que no, no, no. No se puede que no, no, no. Que se quema la calle, no edificio. Si quieren guerra con la tierra, no. Con la tierra, no. Con la tierra, no. Gracias.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Just incredible. I totally felt that, Maria. And I just want to thank you so much for your words. You can't hear me.
We could try this out again, where I could hear you on the other end.
You can see in the chat. People are loving it. And just thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Gracias. Thank you. And thank you for everyone tuning in. It's great to see that we've got a great group of folks that really are on the front lines, even amongst a pandemic, doing what we can to make sure that we're paying attention and that we're taking action each day. In Puerto Rico right now, specifically, we've known the causes of what's been happening with the hurricane, but specifically with the tropical storms. You can't leave a wound open, and our wound hasn't just been open since the hurricane. Our wound's been open since we've been colonized. Our wound has been open since we have been the children of the Jones Act. And there is an environmental crisis in Borinquen amongst this pandemic. Please learn more information about how you can be a part of the work that I'm specifically dedicating and continue to dedicate myself to at elfondoboricua.org. We are doing projects right now with the people in Puerto Rico to assure that they have essentials along with power. The access to power is not happening. So if they are able to tune in, gente de Borinquen, if you're able to be on this call and are on this call, I may not know, thank you for being a part of this conversation. And please continue to let us know how we can continue to help.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much for your generosity and your talent. I hope that Maria's music and her words and the memory of George Floyd and all victims of state violence can continue to motivate us to demand the systems change that we need to see the justice that is so desperately needed in our world. I know that we are nearing the end of our time, and we have a few quick things to let you know about. One is that we had mentioned earlier that we are inviting everybody to write a letter to their legislator. So at the bottom of the screen, there's a link to write a letter. And this is an opportunity to really participate in Eyewitness, which is a form of literary activism. This is going to take a little bit more time. We've created a fill in the style blank for you to personalize with your own story. But we know that it is super important for our legislators to hear from us. There really has never been a more important time in history to demand bold action on climate change. And so we want to make sure to give that opportunity to you. And again, Climate Generation will be collecting these letters, and we will be delivering them to the Minnesota Capitol in 2021. So please bookmark that link and come back to it and take some time to write your own climate story and heartfelt letter for why our elected officials should care about this and do something about it. And then in closing, we just wanted to do a recap of a few of the actions that we've invited you to take part in. I know I'm feeling so inspired by all of the guests and the music and words that Maria shared. Again, please share your story. Make sure to sign the petition. I know that link wasn't working, so also copy that. And then write a letter to your legislator. And then finally, in closing, we'd love for you to follow all of our amazing speakers today. And we're going to share information in our closing slides for how to do that. And then get a copy of the book and make sure to join us for our next workshop on August 18th. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, everyone.